morning, everyone, and welcome to our show, Justice for All, with our District Attorney, Jennifer Schorn. Jennifer, thanks for being here, as always.
Thank you for having me.
The listeners love the shows and the viewers now
Oh,
because it's on YouTube that they can watch it live right now. When you go onto YouTube, it's a special honor for me as a retired police officer to bring you here for these shows. And the guests that you bring are just phenomenal.
top
Lieutenant Bob
notch, right?
Gordon. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And Lieutenant Chris Clark of the Falls Township. Great show ahead. And without further ado, I just want to thank Paul Muller as the sponsor of our show here, Justice for All, right here in the showroom that we commence here at 10 a.m. The second Wednesday well, we go back and forth and rotate with our buddy Fred Herron.
That's right.
Which is another show that we do. But Paul, we want to thank him for his measures, his altruistic measures to make sure that we have these shows so that we bring good information to the listeners and all the spectators that we have that are watching on YouTube. So let's begin with this topic of interest that we're going to talk about today, Jen.
Yeah, so one of the cases that you and I spoke about covering is a pretty remarkable case, and it's a credit to these two gentlemen to my right, Chris Clark from Falls Township and Bob Gorman from my office, the District Attorney's Office. It was a case that occurred in 2016. Well, actually, it occurred for decades prior, but outstanding police work kicked it off in 2016. And it really just highlights how frightening it can be when a child predator is living among us, and we say like a wolf in sheep's clothing, truly, because they ingratiate themselves into the lives of families, often first, so that they can access the kids. And it's a pretty remarkable case. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Chris Clark to explain how we came to learn about this predator, William Thomas, who was living in his jurisdiction in Falls Township, and then how the case unfolded. And, Bob and I will add some details as well, but it was really, and thankfully this predator is off the streets.
Off the streets.
Yeah, off the streets. But, so Chris, if you want to explain how this case came to light, and I'll happily fill in.
Sure. So back November 11th, Veterans Day of 2016, the owner of one of our trailer parks off Bristol Pike was rehabilitating a trailer, and he had a handyman that lived on site that was kind of doing the work for him. And the handyman was in the trailer for several weeks, rehabilitating the trailer, and finalized it. The new tenant moved in and came across this piece of plywood that had this incredibly graphic description of a sexual assault of two children that were under the age of 5.
Oh,
and
geez.
they were named, the date, the time. It was Christmas morning. Like, the story was very graphic, but it provided you all the details and information. It was like a signed confession before a crime, was really reported to the police. So it was an unusual start. But when we had the piece of plywood from previous investigations, I already knew who these two young girls were. So
Sure.
it was like we knew who the author of the plywood was. We knew who the victims were, and that was kind of a non-traditional start to the investigation.
And Lieutenant Clark is talking about a non-traditional start. The vast majority of our child abuse cases, the investigation starts because a child discloses to someone.
Sure.
And
sure.
so then the process unfolds in response to a disclosure already being made. So a child being ready to share at least some aspects of their victimization. This was remarkably challenging because we now have evidence, and Chris is not giving himself enough credit because of the type of member of law enforcement he is. He was able to identify and, working in the community, he knew based on the details, the parents of these two children, their last names weren't provided, but it was evident who they were based on the description. And it was horrific because it was Christmas morning, as Lieutenant Clark said, and it described how the father went out to buy wrapping paper because his wife she had some struggles, and he was an idiot. He didn't have wrapping paper for Christmas presents. So within moments after he left the door, I was able to do, the most graphic things I won't speak to these two prepubescent little girls. It was simply horrific. So, it was very challenging, and I'll turn it back over to Chris
Sure,
to explain
sure,
in more
Chris.
detail.
Please do, yeah.
So the biggest challenge, this was one of several challenges along the same theme in terms of, introducing yourself into someone's life with trauma that they may be not aware that they experienced or that they've dealt with and they don't want to deal with again. So this was the first occasion in this particular investigation. So we had to sit down with the parents and basically say, hey, listen, we can't tell you why we need your children forensically interviewed, but we need you to agree to do this without sharing any information. So, the implication is something terrible may have happened to your children, but we can't share what that is. You're just going to have to take it on faith that we're going to, do this investigation and then we'll talk. So there was, kind of a distrust of law enforcement, unfortunately, with that particular family. So that was a challenge we had to overcome. So it was a kind of a lengthier, buy-in we needed to get from the parents before they agreed to have the children forensically interviewed.
And so the forensic interview takes place at our Child Advocacy Center, and it's a multidisciplinary team approach. You have a forensic interviewer who's not law enforcement, but they're trained not to ask questions in a suggestive or leading manner, while we all view, meaning the district attorney representative, law enforcement, assigned detective, the children and youth caseworker. And the problem is, it is very difficult to elicit a disclosure in that environment if the child had not previously disclosed. So initially, despite this pretty strong evidence, these two little girls were the victims of, the worst type of crime possible. And some time had passed, I think a little over a year and a half.
Yes.
Makes it more difficult.
So challenging. And there was initially not a disclosure made at the CAC. So now on one hand, you have evidence of a child predator, someone you now know and know he's in the community. But on the other hand, there was not a disclosure. So it was a huge hurdle. But again, I'm going to turn it back over because there was the work that was done to gather the information to prepare again. And it is not uncommon to later schedule a second interview, given, time. But I'm going to turn it back over to Chris in a moment. But I will say the lack of trust stemmed from, these were parents who loved their children. The mother had some struggles earlier on with substances, and so naturally there was some, police contact as a result.
Of course.
So unfortunately, the parents' lack of trust, that bleeds into the children and their tension and going to this interview where they don't know. And so the children felt there was they had armor. They were guarded in the first interview. So I'll turn it back over to Chris to explain.
So one of the very interesting things that came out that was very useful in the interview is while they didn't disclose about anything having happened to them, the forensic interview basically talked about people that are in your life. In other words, who do you interact with, who comes to your house. And both girls had an opportunity to say, the guy's name was William Thomas, because he was apparently, a fixture in the community, and neither girl mentioned his name. Now, the forensic interviewer can't be suggestive, as Jen said, and say, do you know Willie Thomas? But it's basically tell me everything about everyone that you associate with. So the girls don't disclose, but they don't name him. So following the interview, we speak with the parents, and we find out that they, in a kind of a sarcastically humorous tone, said, I can't believe, Willie Thomas, he lives with us. He eats at our house all the time. He's there. So the fact that they avoided naming him to us was meaningful in that the trauma had them just kind of disassociate from the knowledge of Thomas. So we felt strong that a follow-up interview would give us, something positive.
Certainly.
And so one of the things, and at some point we'll introduce Bob's role, which was equally an important role, but one of the things that Chris did, and what he's outstanding at doing, was gathering information and having every weapon in your arsenal available. And so Chris learned that there was a prior report. So obviously it's very strange to chronicle your abuse of two children on a piece of wood when you're a handyman. Highly unusual to see in this type of investigation. But there was a report that, not taken by Lieutenant Clark, but another officer. I don't know exactly what the time frame was, but that someone found some unusual things in was it the attic of? Yes,
it was the attic of his former home that he basically sold to a house flipper. So the house flipper was renovating this home to flip the house, and he found some very disturbing Polaroid pictures.
Oh boy!
Some very disturbing, homemade, sex dolls.
Yes.
And some equally disturbing writing about victimizing, a story about victimizing his daughter and then victimizing her again years later in this house.
Wow!
So the report is all I had because unfortunately the officer who took the report didn't take the opportunity to involve criminal investigators. He didn't take the opportunity to collect the evidence. So I had to call the original complainant, several years later to say, hey, listen, can you tell me as much as you know about what was available at the time, and use that as another piece of evidence, geared towards getting a search warrant.
And so our goal was to obtain a search warrant to search not only, his current residence, based on some information received about some unusual things that were in the home, kind of out in the open in the front portion of his residence, but was also to then search his former home. And I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but at some point we were able to do that, and we learned that he chronicled abuse of other children on the interior of the shed in the home with such specificity. And now we know. Now, I don't know that he identified the children as clearly in the shed, but we know that was not just a fantasy, a sick, disturbing fantasy, given it was an actuality. So, we had a lot of evidence to suggest this man had been doing these types of crimes, preying on kids for years, but we were still struggling with, this forensic interview of the two victims that we could identify right from the start. So we, the kind of devotion Chris has to his job, he met with the family, and we discussed meeting with them in advance of this children and youth forensic interview. CAC.
Sure.
And that we would impress upon them, the parents. We would just meet with the parents, because we can't tape the interview, but to say that this is not about them. They're not the focus. We're not looking to, have their children divulge some, struggles, maybe past struggles the mother had, but that this is about someone else, and we can't say who, but we have credible evidence, and all we're asking is that you trust tell your daughters to trust this process and trust the people and convey that to them. And Chris literally met with the family, drove up with them to meet. We met together somewhere in between the evening before the forensic interview, because we knew it was critical that, the children felt that they could trust this and trust everyone involved.
Yeah, there was no disloyalty at all if they were hiding things because of the sake of their parents.
That's exactly. And that's you just hit the nail on the head, Tom. That's one of the grooming tactics that predators use.
Sure.
They, make the child feel like they're in on this together.
Yeah.
And that if you don't say anything, because it'll hurt your parents, but you could also get in trouble. And so there's layers and layers to grooming. There was a lot of preparation into this forensic interview, and I'll let Chris explain what happened that night after we left. And now, mind you, we did not meet with the children. That would be improper. Parents went home, and then interview was scheduled for the next day, but we received some information.
Sure.
So the mother, was kind of really turned the corner when we had this meeting, and really respected, what we were trying to accomplish, and was devoted to make sure that her daughters knew that they were safe and that law enforcement was trustworthy. So during that conversation that night, they started to disclose to her that, Willie had touched them.
Oh boy,
so
here we
she
go.
had to, and God bless her, because she did the responsible thing and immediately shut down, so she didn't, kind of ruin the opportunity for the forensic interview the next day. But she called us, and now we knew we were going into, a really good situation in terms of the interview.
Of course, the opening of some facts that will help incriminate this guy.
Exactly. So I know that, I could talk about the interview briefly if you prefer, or if you want to.
Well, we're going to take a quick pause here to recognize our sponsors here at WBCB, 1490 and it's AM and 107.3 on the FM dial. You're listening to Justice for All here at the showroom at Team Toyota on beautiful 476 East Lincoln Highway. Jennifer Schorn, Bob Gorman, and Chris Clark. We're going to return with more information as we follow this pattern and how we were able to catch this guy and put him where he belongs, behind bars. Don't go anywhere. We'll return after a few moments.
There really is nothing like a home team advantage. That's why Team Toyota is the choice for your next vehicle purchase or service this season. with new Toyota models available for immediate delivery, and over 100 certified used and pre-owned vehicles for any budget, plus service specials to keep you on the road to victory. Shop or schedule online at teamtoyota.net or choose one of our 3 locations in Langhorne, Glen Mills, or Princeton. Are you part of the team?
Are you a parrot head?
Wasted away again in Margarita.
Not that kind. That's more like it. If you're this kind of parrot head, don't forget to check out the Denny O Polka Show every Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon right here on 1490 WBCB and online at WBCB1490.com.
Hi, this is Mayor Jeff Martin of Hamilton Township, inviting you to tune in to our monthly radio show, This Month in Hamilton. Video stream live the 4th Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. at WBCB1490.com. We will be featuring various guests from Hamilton Township to keep you up to date on what's going on in Hamilton.
WBCB is now on your FM dial at 107.3. Serving Bucks, Burlington, and Mercer counties since 1958, you can now listen to all of your BCB favorites crystal clear on 107.3 FM. A new age for WBCB on a new frequency, 107.3.
We're back with Justice for All here on 1490 AM and 107.3 on the dial. Great show that we do every other month on the second Wednesday at 10 a.m. You'll have to tune in on YouTube. You can always bring it up, WBCB live stream, and you'll see the upcoming shows. You can click onto that, and voila, here you are. You're watching it just like as if you were watching it on television. But these are great shows. So that you understand the criminal justice system and how it works and how effective it is and how they keep us as safe as possible. And then obviously with Jennifer Schorn at the helm as the district attorney, if you're a criminal, don't be crawling through the streets or the areas and neighborhoods in Bucks County, because you will be caught and prosecuted to the highest extent. But let's get right back to this case.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the kind words.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm going to turn it back over to Lieutenant Clark to describe what happened, as it relates to the CAC the following day.
Yes.
With the oldest child.
Okay.
And then next investigative steps. Just pretty remarkable. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
So the older daughter did disclose, and she had talked about being exposed to Thomas's penis, and she had talked about being in states of undress, and she had talked about watching her sister be, kind of touched by him. And she said he does disgusting things, so she kind of just, broadly described conduct. So for us, that was, exactly where we needed to be.
Of course. That's what really opened the case up.
It did. And we had learned from an individual that he had some strange things, I think, on his phone, and that there was some strange, unusual things in his home. And so if you want to jump in, either of you, on more details as to the information before searching his residence, we knew. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, so the same complainant, the owner, the manager, the trailer park who brought the wood in, we took him into our confidence to kind of let him know, what we were trying to accomplish, and we asked for some cooperation, from his end in different investigative measures. But he shared with us that in the capacity of, dealing with him as a handyman, he'd been in his trailer and he'd saw pictures of underage, or at least what appeared to be underage, girls kind of like framed. And on his Thomas's, kind of clamshell flip phone, he had a screenshot of what appeared to be a child. So, we had the original complainant kind of explore those, conversations and Thomas's interests a little bit more in detail to help us with our case.
And we're kind of being general there because it's an investigative tool we use, and that's where Bob comes in, and it's one of his specialties as far as, running this type of investigative tool. But it helped us gather the information to build the probable cause to search his residence. So if you have, a robbery that occurs. And as you know, Tom, the felon flees with the gun in a car that's identified by the victim, and he then is seen in his, entering his neighborhood, and the car's parked outside of his house. You would pull a search warrant to get probable cause to search the house based on all of the information, the timeline, to search for a gun based on, so it's a pretty obvious probable cause to search.
Of course.
In child abuse cases where the abuse happens oftentimes years before the disclosure or years, before evidence is unearthed about the abuse, and it's not a crime that, where you're going to recover a gun, where there are no witnesses. It happens behind closed doors. So it's very challenging to establish a basis to search somebody's home. And that's where the skills of these detectives come into play, to creatively establish probable cause, why we think there is evidence in that home of child abuse that may have occurred 2 years prior, may have occurred 10 years prior, or why child erotica, so framed pictures of girls clothed, may suggest child pornography. And it's really challenging, but they have perfected the ability to do that. And so we now know a child abuse prosecution with the word of a victim alone is so difficult to put on, and it's not fair to that victim, and also not likely to succeed beyond a reasonable doubt.
In front of a jury.
In front of a jury. They want corroboration. So that's why, you could charge a case with the word of the victim alone if you believe a victim, but are you doing justice? So that was what was amazing to witness, and I can't really describe it. And again, because we can't talk about this one other aspect, but we developed the probable cause to search his actual residence, not the shed of his former residence, which, that obviously was an easier search because he had no longer that expectation of privacy. And I'll turn it over. Maybe Bob can describe a little bit of what we saw when you first entered that residence.
Yeah, so I was called in by Chris after he did this fantastic legwork and all the heavy lifting. He called us in to give him a hand, so we used some special investigative techniques, and then we were able to obtain enough probable cause to get a search warrant. So I accompanied Chris along with some other Falls Township police officers, some county detectives, and we made entry into this trailer where we found thousands of photographs, hundreds of pairs of underwear, all kinds of magazines, photos, you name it, he had it. He had mobiles hanging from the ceiling. He had all kinds of stuff just affixed to in the bedroom, in the bathroom, in the hallways, just everywhere, littered with this pornography.
Horrible.
Child pornography, child erotica, like trophies of what he had done in the past. And perhaps maybe, we've seen a lot, but I have never seen anything like this home and this collection of child pornography and child erotica. I remember Chris called me. It was late at night. My kids were little. I think given the year, I had a baby, my youngest.
8 years ago,
yeah,
right?
and my husband, who works in law enforcement, was working that night. And Chris called me and said, Jen, you have to see this. It's like nothing you have ever seen. And describing it would never do it justice. He goes, every surface of every object is covered in child pornography or child erotica.
Oh, my God.
So I called my husband, who was able to say, yep, I'll end my shift. I'll come home to watch the kids. And Chris also, I think, warned me to kind of put on clothes that you're not too worried about, because it was pretty,
graphic.
And so
horrible.
I met down at at this predator's home, and I saw the faces of the officers coming out, and, they see everything, but they looked shocked at what they saw. Like it really, when Bob talks about underwear, there were 800 pairs of little girls' underwear, and many of them had names written on them. And like I said, like trophies.
Right, trophies.
Yeah. And Chris is going to be able to describe some more detail. Is there anything you wanted to add as far as the house, too?
I mean, it was a museum to the relentless obsession to have sex with children. I mean, we at one point contemplated actually taking the entire trailer because it would have been easier than moving. We basically had to, we took walls. I mean, we were there for 3 days. And it was the winter, so we had a tent with a generator. I mean, we were working in shifts. I mean, it was unbelievable just to collect this evidence. And that was just the start of it, because then we had to transport it, catalog it, and get it ready for discovery and prosecution. But I mean, like Jen said, it's impossible to describe this man's devotion. He didn't have running water or heat in this house.
Oh, my goodness.
All he did was obsess about having, appropriate contact.
Appropriate contact with children.
And, like it was things that you couldn't even imagine someone, even though we see people who are that sick, sadly, all too often.
Yeah.
But to take, for example, an Elmo doll and then affix on the Elmo doll genitalia to simulate, or a pacifier. Take a pacifier instead of, the silicone portion that's the pacifier, to take male genitalia a little and attach it, and to dolls that had silicone genitalia attached, like everything you could imagine to desecrate, like he did. And it was hard. You have family members, you have children, you have loved ones, children in your life, and to take like a baby doll and make it look like a sexual object. Really kind of shed some light into just how dark this man is.
And how long is this?
How long? And so
and how many?
That kind of, you are honing right in on. So you see all of that. You see the child pornography, and to distinguish, there is child pornography that's sadly available commercially. That sounds disturbing to say.
It's horrible.
But then there is a distinction between what appears to be manufactured, meaning you victimized that victim and captured it on a picture. And he was not very tech savvy. So, this was stuff we're seeing, and you could physically see. But nowadays, sadly, predators like him who are like-minded, all of that stuff exists in the digital world. And so as much as we say we don't think we'll ever see anything like it again, we do. We just see it in the digital world. Like, this was in your face because he was old school. But all of that being said, despite what we saw, I think the thing that literally gutted me was he was a remarkable artist. He had drawings, and again, he would chronicle the abuse. He would draw his victims and then write the most unimaginable, detailed diary account of his abuse
these individuals.
And so it ended up being tremendously valuable from an investigative standpoint to help. We knew there were more victims. We knew this spanned years, given what he chronicled, and we knew he was taken. We failed to mention he was taken into custody.
He gave a full confession, and
finally.
So Bob and I, kind of split tasks. So Bob was executing the search warrant. I was doing the interview, and based on the where the interview went, I was able to kind of tell Bob, hey, listen, he's saying that this is here, this is there, because he ended up, confessing to not the totality of his crimes, but a great deal, which was
with this particular case especially.
Yes. And what Chris is not giving enough credit to both Bob and Chris, and I know you have to take a break in a moment, but is the logistics that were involved, because in order to execute the search warrant on the trailer, they had to take him into custody, execute the search warrant, try to have an informed interview. There were a lot of moving parts that day. And it's just there's a lot of logistics and tactical decisions that were made to make sure, that everybody's safe, that law enforcement's safe. But keep in mind too, what was weighing on us is the pressure of he's out in the community as we're waiting for the CAC, as we're, you know what I mean? And every minute you think, could he be victimizing others? So it was a very skilled interview, and he admitted to having this obsession for years. And I think as young as when he was adolescent aged himself.
And you wonder if he was a victim of abuse.
You do wonder. You do wonder
about that.
Yeah.
Has someone effectuated it to him at a young age, where it just transcended from that point?
We do see that. We do see that happen, as you know.
Oh my God! And the science, the careful methods of practice that you have to employ, so that when you're prosecuting, you want to make sure that nothing is going to get disrupted where now something could be thrown out and now we don't have a case.
Yes.
But the evidence is clear here, very transparent.
No, you're right, but you're so right in that you constantly worry, is our search warrant going to survive scrutiny? Is the confession is going to be challenged,
Of course.
but it was outstanding the way it was conducted, and so obviously we survived all of those challenges, but there's definitely more to the investigation that will fill you in
Absolutely.
after we
After
break.
a quick pause for our station identification and our sponsors, Paul Muller, once again, thank you. Bob Gorman, Chris Clark, and our district attorney, Jennifer Schorn. We're going to return very soon because there's a lot of information that we still have to display to get out to you so that you'll understand how serious this is. Don't go anywhere. We'll return after a few moments.
There really is nothing like a home team advantage. That's why Team Toyota is the choice for your next vehicle purchase or service this season. With new Toyota models available for immediate delivery and over 100 certified used and pre-owned vehicles for any budget, plus service specials to keep you on the road to victory. Shop or schedule online at teamtoyota.net or choose one of our 3 locations in Langhorne, Glen Mills, or Princeton. Are you part of the team?
Hey, this is Jonesy. Kick off your Thursday and Friday evenings in style. Join me for an eclectic freeform mix of the hits and beyond. It's a happening, a musical journey. It's the Glenn Jones Radio Experience, right here on 1490 WBCB and 107.3 FM, Thursday and Friday, 5 to 6 p.m., directly following the legendary Jerry Blavitt. Radio, the way it ought to be.
Opinions matter, and so does yours. Hi, I'm Joe Fabrizi, inviting you to join us every Monday at 1 p.m. for Opinions Matter, right here on 1490 AM WBCB. Opinions Matter is now live streamed at WBCB1490.com. We want to hear from you because your opinion does matter.
WBCB is now on your FM dial at 107.3. Serving Bucks, Burlington, and Mercer counties since 1958, you can now listen to all of your BCB favorites crystal clear on 107.3 FM. A new age for WBCB on a new frequency, 107.3.
We're back with Justice for All with Bucks County District Attorney Jennifer Schorn, Bob Gorman, our lieutenant assigned to the district attorney's office, and Chris Clark in Bristol
Falls
Township. And we talk about justice for all. We need justice for all, and this is a direct example of how dangerous it is if we don't educate our children and make sure that we get cooperation. And the best way to get cooperation is to, once again, educate our children. It starts with the parents. It starts with our neighbors who if you see a sign of something that just is out of character, incongruous in any way, it should be brought to the attention of the police department and the district attorney's office so that they can investigate and hopefully prevent these horrendous acts that they're just so tormented. When I think about it, and how many children are actually victims, and they're afraid a lot of times. So education is important as well.
Yeah.
Get right back to it.
Yeah, and Tom, just to echo what you're saying, when I was a kid, it was stranger danger.
Yes.
And we've come across that, come off of that.
Yes.
Yes, on occasion you do have a stranger predator, but they are the exception to the rule. This case is the example of the fact that it's someone it's someone who's
trusted by the parents.
Trusted by the parents. I mean, as much as we describe this trailer being, it was filthy in addition to the horrific, crime scene that it was. I mean, he presented well. He broke bread with countless families who he victimized, having dinner at their kitchen table every night, and was well spoken, for lack of a better term. I mean, so it allowed him to be able to access and get close to kids. So just to remind the community, yes, I mean, obviously you always want to make your children careful and cautious around strangers, but that the communication and the trust with their family or close adult role model that they can tell them anything and they're not going to be in trouble, because sadly all too often it is someone that's known to both the family and the child.
The sheep in wolf's
Yes,
clothing, right?
exactly. So, but the details of the investigation, I'm going to turn it back over to Bob and Chris to establish what happened next, because although we had enough now and he confessed, we had to still go through this painstaking task of identifying other victims.
Sure.
Given his own admission that his obsession towards children spanned decades. So I'll turn it back over to Bob and Chris for more details.
Great.
So the some of the girls that were mentioned in the writing in the shed, we identified them and we went out, interviewed them, and we found out that they were essentially babysat by him as children, and they had these experiences where he, was having them change in front of them. He was exposing his penis to them. He was doing things that kind of corroborated their story. And it was a lot of trauma that they had lived with in a very troubling period of their life that they, kind of, repressed. But now, once again, as I said earlier, now it's up front and personal, and they're dealing with it. And it was very, terrible for them to have to go through that again. His stepdaughter, we spoke with her, and again, she's now a mother of her own children, and now we're, going in a time machine where she's remembering waking up in the middle of the night, and he's in her room, and he had, one of the tactics he had with her is the doll that Jen described as the Elmo doll with the superimposed genitalia. He would use that to victimize her so that there would be like a fuzzy memory, so she would not know what was going on based on her age. I mean, he was very masterful at grooming and kind of feeling out people, escalating his behavior, exposing pornography to normalize it, and then introducing a discussion, which is a major part of grooming.
Of course.
And even in the interview, he was very clinical in terms of discussing, well, I did this, and then I would see if I could do more. It was just kind of the introduction. He would walk around with his penis exposed to see if it was a conversation would ensue, and then he could take it to the next level.
Sure.
So his own biological daughter, he molested. And memorialized it with Polaroid photographs that we recovered in the search warrant, where she was asleep as a child. So all those interviews, were very, very difficult for the girls, for their families. Certainly, they assigned blame, or there was some contribution to how did my parents allow me to be in a situation where this would have happened to me. So it reopened all those kinds of wounds. So that was a difficult but necessary part of the investigation.
And I want to just credit, we had, two of the victims who were victimized, as Chris mentioned, and he chronicled the abuse in the shed in his prior single-family home, which was his childhood home that he then inherited. They were young adults at the time, in their early 20s, and they were really pretty amazing. I mean, we had to tell them, we now know about your victimization, and they were not ready to talk. Well, they did with us, but they hadn't dealt with it. And not only did they have to face, their past abuse up front and in a very public manner, but then they took this huge step in that they wanted to assist in helping identify other victims. So they partook in a press conference, not, for us to see our faces on the news, but at NOVA, our agency for victim advocacy, our network of victim assistance, with their advocates standing behind them to encourage any victims of Willie Thomas, but any victims of abuse to come forward and trust the process. And they spoke directly to, any other victims of his out there. And it was so powerful to witness. I mean, these two young women, and really brave. And then his stepdaughter, oh my goodness, who was, as Chris mentioned, a married mother and had a couple of children of her own, was one of the most brilliant, individuals I've ever met, and had such a high EQ, that emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And her victim impact statement, I'll never forget. I mean, when she just, and I think it almost became like she was the oldest of the victims, as the criminal process, the prosecution unfolded, and she really kind of became that, like a matriarch of that group, if that makes sense. Pretty impressive.
That does make sense.
Yeah,
no, you're right.
Really impressive stuff. Bob, do you want to talk about some of the things that had to occur in preparation for trial, especially given the scope of the evidence?
Yeah, so after we executed the search warrant and we brought everything back to Falls Township Police Department, we had very basic, like wall A, wall B, wall C. We took everything in bulk, and once we got it back to Falls Township for at least 3 weeks, every day, myself, Lieutenant Clark, and administrative assistant went through every item, cataloging, removing it from the fixture, putting it into books, and it just took a very long time going through all the undergarments, going through all the photographs, going through all the drawings, all the writings. It just took a long time. There were thousands and thousands of pieces of evidence that we had to chronicle in relation to that, and then going through each one to see how they fit into the puzzle of the investigation, which victim. So it was a lot of work, and then the reports associated with that, again, just to chronicle everything and to get it just right, so the district attorney could prosecute the case.
And I know that we're not going to have which will be revealed here. How long it took for the prosecution to get a verdict from the jury, but it had to be pretty swift with all the evidence.
Well, interesting enough, and this is where, these guys and the work they do, make my job easy sometimes. As well as I do, you have to prepare for trial, given your past law enforcement. And as Bob's describing discovery, few people realize, the arrest is made and it looks like job done, police are done their job. But no, that from the moment that arrest is made until really good ones, until post-sentencing, but at least until sentencing, that investigation is continuing.
Yes.
And cataloging and gathering the evidence so that we have every, tool available to us. And so we had giant poster boards with all of the evidence affixed, and like Bob said, try to link victim crimes to the evidence that was recovered in preparation for trial. And, they had to live this 10 hours a day for 3 weeks straight. It became their full-time job. We're finally prepared, for trial, and he pleads guilty. We didn't give him anything, not a single count drop, no deal.
No.
He pleads guilty. So, I did not want their efforts to be in vain.
That's
and
true.
I also wanted the judge to understand, because we could describe it, but unless you see it, and you really understand the level of depravity, you don't get it. So we had a box truck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bring all of those
My God.
exhibits up, and we brought them into, not everyone, but we brought, a sampling, and we indicated this is just a sampling, into the courtroom at the time of the plea and sentencing. So the judge was, I think sentencing. So the judge was aware of the scope of this. So yes, I kind of, we were prepared for trial, but open plea to everything, and that is the direct result of the work they did.
Right.
So
There were about 40 to 50 4x8 sheets of plywood covered with the evidence.
That's right.
Unbelievable. So there wasn't much for a jury to
No. I don't know how
especially
you.
with the plea.
Yeah, and the confession and everything. I don't know how you could. It was and also, Chris, I don't know if time permits, if you want to speak about, you were in a basement of a children and youth agency in somewhere upstate, trying to continue to gather information. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so it was a missed opportunity in the case where his biological daughter, they were camping at Knoebels Grove a decade ago earlier when she was a very young child, and he had given her this small little change purse, and in the change purse he wrote a note to her essentially soliciting a sex act to perform on her, and that she would, return the favor in kind. So he gives this to her, hoping, again, that it's going to lend itself to a conversation. She finds the note. She tells her mother. Children and youth are called, and unfortunately, with they lived here, but the crime happened in, I don't know what county that was, but essentially that's where all the evidence was. So we had to go there to obtain, the note, and obviously and we did end up getting an opportunity to prosecute him for that, because there was not a statutory issue given the change in laws. But that's just how far back, his crimes went. That was yes.
Wow, that's incredible. We're going to pause for another quick break with our sponsors. Don't go anywhere. We have some final comments and to wrap this up. But once again, we want to talk about the education and how we need our children to be aware, especially physically, of if they are touched in certain areas, not to hide that, to let your parents know, to let someone know, so that it can be investigated and thwarted right at that point.
Right.
We'll return after a few comments with our sponsors. Don't go anywhere.
There really is nothing like a home team advantage. That's why Team Toyota is the choice for your next vehicle purchase or service this season. With new Toyota models available for immediate delivery and over 100 certified used and pre-owned vehicles for any budget, plus service specials to keep you on the road to victory. Shop or schedule online at teamtoyota.net or choose one of our 3 locations in Langhorne, Glen Mills, or Princeton. Are you part of the team?
Are you a parrot head?
We stayed away again in Margarita.
Not that kind. That's more like it. If you're this kind of parrot head, don't forget to check out the Denny-O Polka Show every Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon right here on 1490 WBCB and online at WBCB1490.com.
Hey, this is Jonesy. Kick off your Thursday and Friday evenings in style. Join me for an eclectic freeform mix of the hits and beyond. It's a happening, a musical journey. It's the Glenn Jones radio experience right here on 1490 WBCB and 107.3 FM, Thursday and Friday, 5 to 6 p.m., directly following the legendary Jerry Blavitt. Radio, the way it ought to be.
WBCB is now on your FM dial at 107.3. Serving Bucks, Burlington, and Mercer counties since 1958, you can now listen to all of your BCB favorites crystal clear on 107.3 FM. A new age for WBCB on a new frequency, 107.3.
We're back with Justice for All with our District Attorney Jennifer Schorn, and if this particular show doesn't make you aware of the seriousness of child predators out there, you really need to know it's something that education's important, so that you look for these signs and you look for these signals, because it needs to be stopped as much as possible. So the question I did ask you, this creep, he admits to certain crimes. But what happens now in the event something else surfaces? We were talking about that.
Yeah, so I'll turn that over to Bob Gorman, and he can...
Yeah, so in January of this year, I received a phone call from, initially it was an email that I got from a young lady in East Stroudsburg. She lived in the East Stroudsburg area,
Right.
but now she's out of the area in another state. And she believes that she was victimized by Willie Thomas. So I gathered all her information and contacted the police department in East Stroudsburg, where she believed the occurrence happened, and gave them the information I had along with her contact information, and they're presently investigating him as a suspect in sexual assault of a juvenile.
And it just goes to show that, the commitment. Like, we know Willie Thomas is away for life, which we failed to mention. He will be eligible for parole at 119 years of age.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah.
And that would be at his minimum.
At his minimum, 119.
119. But
the neighborhoods feel a little bit safer that he's tucked away.
Right. But to Bob's point and credit, the job doesn't stop. Each victim has a right to, be heard. And so the fact that, still following up and getting the information to the appropriate law enforcement agencies, that's the exceptional work that, these two do. And we're lucky in Bucks County because we have our law enforcement, they go over and beyond. But, you can't just say, well, he's locked up. We know the community's safe from him. What if there was someone else involved? But that victim also, she deserves her, her justice, her time. Yes.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
but there's an interesting couple of facts that Chris reminded me of once Willie Thomas was sent to the Bucks County Correctional Facility. So I'll turn it over to Chris.
So the depravity with Thomas in terms of having the constant fantasy of having sexual contact with children was so deep that now he came in for the interview with us and he had no idea that he was there for this type of interview. We had him there under the pretense that he was helping about an alibi in a robbery investigation.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like he prepared what he was bringing with him to the police station. So that turned out to be his last night as a free man, and he's incarcerated. And when they take him to the prison, obviously they're doing a search, and here he had soiled girls' underwear against his skin, secreted in his own underwear. He just needed to have it on him, accessible to him all the time. I mean, that's just the obsession, the disturbing obsession that he had.
Yeah, it's really, we say it's next level, and each time I think we'll never see anything like it. Sadly, though, we do. And like I said, he was old school in that his child pornography was physically there and available if someone could get past the threshold of his bedroom, and had a flip style phone. But the scary part is the number of predators that have that collection and that type of evidence, and it's all captured digitally. It makes it very challenging for us to discover. Law enforcement is great at working with internet service providers to identify any, we call it CSAM, child sexual abuse material being shared. But it is concerning, and that is the message you were saying to the community. You put Willie Thomas in a home doing some handiwork, you would never know this nice guy who's sitting at your kitchen table is a predator. And it's sad that you have to, assume the worst sometimes in individuals. But just like Willie, there are others out there, and, capturing their child pornography or their conquests of victimization, in the digital realm. So it just really is just a wake-up call. We have to be hyper-vigilant in this area to protect our kids.
Absolutely, and it begins from the parents and the neighbors looking for the outward signs that may be occurring. And even, the abnormal characteristics of a child, if they're just not, they're not in full sync, something, they're off center.
Yeah.
What's the reason for that?
That's a great point, Tom.
Yes,
that's a great point.
Absolutely. Look at that, because you can look deeply into the eyes of a child and you know that there's something that they're protecting that they should not be protecting. And this goes, and really when you look at where do these crimes occur, it's everywhere. I mean,
everywhere.
It doesn't just linger in one area. These seedy individuals, you never know where they're lurking. You never know who they are. They could be a neighbor. They could be a friend. As with this guy, he was doing a lot of utility work in homes and built a trust and a confidence with all the people that he was working for. Thus a reason to build his group of children, as a predator.
Yes. Well said. I could not have said it better. That's exactly. And, with the grooming, they have children betwixt and between. They blur the lines of what is good and what is bad, and who can be trusted and who shouldn't be trusted. And so it's the insurance policy that they're not going to immediately report. And they also look at, what children they're going to victimize. A real feisty child, they might move on to the sibling who's a little more reserved. So it is really the level. We talk about premeditation and homicide, and how that's the planning, the preparation. Let me tell you, there's not a single other type of case that has more planning and preparation to execute the crimes than child predators. I mean, it's pretty remarkable what they do to carry out their crimes, and then the future insurance.
They're genius. I mean, they're very intelligent, high IQ individuals. Well, they have to be, because they know that if they're not going to get caught, they have to be that way.
Exactly.
Their characteristics, they're well insulated, and you would never expect.
Absolutely.
With some of these cases. So, as we're coming to the end here, I want to thank Bob Gorman and Chris Clark, and especially our host here, Jennifer Schorn, the Bucks County District Attorney, who brings these incredible bits of information to increase the awareness about how crime is committed, what to look for, the signs to look for. It's a great show. I hope you're taking advantage of it. We try, meaning you, our listeners, and it's just something that we want to continue so that all of our listeners can be a little bit more prepared and built and know how to identify things with our own children.
Yeah.
And the teachers out there, our educators as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, schools, they play a very important part. And you could have predators in the schools, as we have found. Yeah, but thankfully the vast majority of people in this world are good, and that's why I'm a firm believer in, as a mandated reporter, you make that report.
don't assess the credibility. Let the experts, assess the credibility of your concerns.
Absolutely.
Make the report, and if it's done confidentially, and if it turns out it's a false alarm and the child is otherwise struggling with something unrelated to child abuse, then the experts will know that, and we will move forward, and it will be the anonymity or the confidentiality will be maintained.
We'll be
But
there.
you absolutely said it best, Tom.
Yes, absolutely. A high regard and kudos to our prosecutors, led by Jennifer Schorn, and then we have our police departments that are out there keeping our communities as safe as possible. But you need to communicate with the criminal justice system so that they can work together. Everyone can work cohesively to try and rid the dirt that's out there, and how it ruins the lives of a lot of our children as they grow. I can't thank you enough, Bob, Chris, Bob Gorman,
Thank you.
Chris
Thanks for
Clark.
having me.
Great, and thank you for being a part of keeping everything safe and secure. And Jen,
Absolutely.
you know how everyone feels about what you're doing.
Thank you.
As the prosecutor. I know we only have a few minutes left. 3 minutes. This case that you're prosecuting, that's something that we'll keep our eye on. I know you can't really reveal too much because the case is still going on.
Yeah, it's
this triple homicide
and
in Bucks County.
Chris and his Chief Whitney,
Yes.
and the men and women in their department and all the surrounding departments were outstanding at capturing this individual who victimized. I mean, his crimes are just unrivaled. Those are tough cases. You have a child murdered, 2 mothers murdered. It is so. The process is unfolding, and as you mentioned, we're not able to talk about the details, but I can at least praise the surviving victims and law enforcement, because their courage is what keeps us going.
Sure.
As a career prosecutor, it's what gets you through, witnessing the work that law enforcement does on these cases and the courage of the victims, family members, and surviving victims.
Great.
So,
you're right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone for listening in. You can listen to this show and watch it anytime on YouTube, WBCB 1490 live stream, upcoming events. Speaking of upcoming events, we have a crowd out here of distinguished people. Mike the Bonus, Charlie Esposito, who had some things to do. He was in tears today. He couldn't make the show, but look at him. I can see. Yeah. But Charlie's here. Mike the Bonus, the Vice President for the Bucks County Tour of Honor.
Oh,
Joe
wonderful.
Saffron, a lot of our volunteers. April 15th, which is Monday, and I'll sign off with this, is our salute to all of our military. We'll be bringing 4 busloads of our a few of our World War II World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam soldiers, our vets, to praise them and give them a full day of honor.
Wow.
With the Bucks County Tour of Honor.
That's wonderful.
And I can't tell you enough about how the excitement that it brings and the sentiment that it brings to our military. That's our Bucks County Tour of Honor, which is now the office is upstairs. Our home office is right here in the Team Toyota building, thanks to Paul Muller.
That's outstanding.
But on behalf of everyone here at Team Toyota, myself, Tom Mellon, your host, Jennifer Schorn, my sidekick here, who keeps these interesting and wonderful programs and stories, actual stories, to you so that you understand more about, how effective it is in Bucks County and how safe it is, thanks to our professionals. Until next time, I want to thank everyone for listening. Be safe, stay well. Jerry, as I always say, coming home to walk the dog a little later on. I have some other things to do, as she'll be just shaking her head. But at any rate, most importantly, as I say at the end of all of our shows, right, Bree? I'm going through puberty there, my God. Most importantly, God bless America.